And I want to keep doing that.
And Bloomberg's facing renewed scrutiny about past policies he supported that unfairly targeted minorities.
His policies humiliated and offended hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that is something that is worthy of discussion.
Also a big issue for voters, health care. Last night, a union member raised concern that Sanders' plan would strip hard-won benefits.
When unions negotiate, what is the major issue that's up for negotiation? Whether or not they're going to take back some of the health care benefits. You want a 3% raise? Okay, we're going to cut your health care.
And Pete Buttigieg addressed President Trump's latest Medal of Freedom recipient, Rush Limbaugh's comments that America is not ready for a gay president.
Sorry, but one thing about my marriage is it's never involved me having to send hush money to a porn star after cheating on my spouse.
As for Bloomberg, his team is ready for any potential criticism he may face tonight. His campaign said if the billionaire is elected, he will sell off his business. Nicole Killian, CBS News, Las Vegas.
And for more on what to expect tonight in Sin City, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Linda Tran. Caitlin's a CBSN political reporter. Linda, a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. So, Caitlin, obviously big focus tonight on Michael Bloomberg. How has he been preparing? What's his campaign saying ahead of this first debate performance?
Well, I've talked to the campaign, and they say they know that Michael Bloomberg is going into tonight with a huge target on his back. You've seen the attacks from his rivals over the past couple of days here on the campaign trail in Las Vegas, and they expect more of that tonight. They expect to be in the spotlight. We've been kind of talking about the risks for Mike Bloomberg appearing here tonight, and I've been kind of comparing it to that meme, you know, Instagram versus reality. That's, I think, the description or the challenge for Michael Bloomberg. On one hand, throughout the 3 months of his campaign, he's been able to really control his message online, on social media, on the airwaves. He's been holding campaign events in battleground states and Super Tuesday states, but he hasn't been on the debate stage with his rivals. Tonight, he will be unedited. He won't have the chance to go back, and he will kind of be in that zone where this is the first chance that a lot of his rivals have to go after him. He's also going to have to defend his record on stage. It's been a while, over a decade, since he's been on a debate stage, so he is going to be likely a little bit rusty, considering that his Democratic rivals have been doing this every week this year so far. They're very tested in this kind of format, so I'm interested to see kind of who directly attacks Bloomberg, because he is considered someone who is on the rise and someone who has the money to make this a long competitive race.
Linda, he may be on the rise, he may have money, but he also has a record that candidates can go after. You've got stop and frisk. You've got disparaging comments against women. You've got at one point him saying that Chinese President Xi Jinping is not a dictator. What do you think tonight could potentially hurt him the most?
Well, I think all of those points that you just raised, Rena, are going to come up on the debate stage. It would be not great strategy for his opponents on the debate stage not to lead us there if the moderators don't. All that said, Michael Bloomberg has also a very, very long history of contributing vast amounts of his personal fortune to progressive causes, things like gun violence, one of his marquee issue areas, which I think will be particularly resonant here in Las Vegas. So he certainly has an opportunity to showcase to the American public some of the details, maybe give a little personality and anecdote to flush out what we've already seen on his massive advertising campaigns.
Caitlin, it's hard to ignore for when you look at Senator Sanders and Michael Bloomberg, their health and their age. Both men are 78. Earlier today in an interview, Sanders' press secretary actually said that the attacks against him and his health were smear campaigns. She said that Bloomberg had actually survived a heart attack of his own. The Bloomberg campaign came back and said they denied that. And then you got Secretary Sanders' press secretary walking that back and tweeting out saying, I misspoke when I said Bloomberg had a heart attack. Rather, he underwent the same stent procedure as Bernie. So, Caitlin, are voters concerned about age and health? Is that a real vulnerability for these two candidates?
A lot of back and forth going on between those campaigns this morning, and that could certainly be an issue addressed on the debate stage tonight. You have to consider that age is a really critical factor, because you look at Joe Biden, you look at Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Michael Bloomberg, they're all the same age. And the question of health and fitness for office is always a question for candidates running for the highest office in the land. Transparency is critical. The public demands it, and presidential candidates should share all of their health information, because this is a grueling job, and this is a job that is, you're running for the next 4 years. And so this is an important issue, I think, and this is something that we've seen other candidates like Pete Buttigieg, who is the youngest candidate in this race, really try to use to his advantage, calling for a fresh face on this scene. You've also heard from Amy Klobuchar trying to play kind of the middle ground. She's not the youngest, but she's not the oldest, so she has enough experience. That's what she's been trying to play. Something that I'm interested, though, in watching tonight as it relates to Bernie Sanders, as we're talking about his health, is whether he becomes the target of attacks. We've been talking a lot about Michael Bloomberg, and rightfully so, but Bernie Sanders has been on the rise. He's been surging in polls nationally. He's poised to do well here in Nevada in the caucuses, which require a lot of key organization, coming off that New Hampshire win. I'm curious to see how his rivals attack him, whether and how they attack him. For Michael Bloomberg, I think he would like this race to be between himself and Bernie Sanders, because that's a way for him to kind of consolidate, or try to consolidate, the more moderate wing of the party, who is growing increasingly concerned about the rise of Bernie Sanders. So expect all of those issues to be center stage tonight.
Is it likely, Linda, to be Bernie Sanders and Bloomberg? We saw former Vice President Joe Biden not perform well in Iowa and New Hampshire. Is tonight really do or die for Biden?
Well, Vice President Biden's campaign has said that they feel they must take second in this contest this coming weekend, because I think they understand that the disappointing finish in Iowa and New Hampshire has really impacted this electability argument that he has made center of his campaign. And so if he doesn't turn in a stellar performance tonight and then get a lot of support this coming Saturday, that's going to be really tough for them to walk back from. You know, I've often said, you know, we need to be cautious about how we're evaluating these early states, because as we stand here today, less than 2% of the Democratic electorate has actually cast their ballot. So we shouldn't count anybody out or leap to foregone conclusions. I think that Vice President Biden's campaign would be the first to say you can't count out Joe. But if the narrative continues along this route, it makes it increasingly difficult for him to raise the resources that he needs to compete Super Tuesday and beyond.
And on that subject of not counting anyone out, the last debate in New Hampshire, we saw a really strong performance from Senator Amy Klobuchar. This turn, you know, will it help her in the primary at this point, Caitlin? Do you see that momentum really helping her?
Well, she has really come off that third place finish in New Hampshire and has been trying to build her campaign to last. And so she's been trying to build out an organization here. And she's also been looking forward to those Super Tuesday states in between stops here around Nevada. She's been going to Colorado, and some of these other candidates have been going to California, of course, just across the border to the west. And so they're trying to do a lot of things at once. What's really critical about the Nevada caucuses is because this is the first time in the campaign in this primary cycle where these candidates are going to be facing a more diverse electorate, an electorate that they argue looks more like the Democratic Party and more like the larger electorate. And this is something that they've been hammering over and over again, that this is kind of where the campaign really can start. So Amy Klobuchar does, while she had that surge in New Hampshire, while she's been gaining a lot of positive attention, she still has to focus on minority voters. She still has to build out a campaign operation and speak to voters that she hasn't been speaking to before. So that's a challenge for her campaign. We have seen her, though, in these debates really use that time, capitalize on that time to gain traction. And so I think we can expect that from her tonight.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Linda Tran, we look forward to more analysis from you throughout the day. Thank you very much for joining us. And just a reminder, CBSN will have full coverage of tonight's debate. We're going to be live from Las Vegas, starting off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern with a preview of the event. We'll have a full recap with in-depth analysis after the debate. That starts at 11 p.m. Eastern. All of it right here on CBSN. Well, as we mentioned at the top of the show, Rod Blagojevich is speaking out after his release from prison, and he's thanking President Trump. He returned to his Chicago home early this morning. Former Democratic governor of Illinois spent 8 years in prison after prosecutors said he tried to sell or trade Barack Obama's vacated Senate seat in 2008. Blagojevich was later impeached and removed by Illinois lawmakers. He's one of 11 people who received commutations or pardons from President Trump yesterday. Others included junk bond king and the former owner of the San Francisco 49ers. Today, Blagojevich addressed reporters. He thanked President Trump for his decision, and he also railed against America's criminal justice system.
How do you properly thank someone who's given you back the freedom that was stolen from you? He didn't have to do this. He's a Republican president. I was a Democratic governor. And doing this does nothing to help his politics. It is a broken criminal justice system, and it has been for a long time. And it's a racist criminal justice system. But there's hope. And one of the great ironies of history is that so far up till now, in the history of our country, no one has done more or is currently working to do more to fix this broken and racist criminal justice system than President Trump and Jared Kushner.
Well, here's how President Trump explained his decision to commute Blagojevich's sentence yesterday.
I watched his wife on television. I don't know him very well. I met him a couple of times. He was on for a short while of The Apprentice years ago. Seemed like a very nice person. Don't know him, but he served 8 years in jail. There's a long time to go. Many people disagree with the sentence. He's a Democrat. He's not a Republican. It was a prosecution by the same people, Comey, Fitzpatrick, the same group, very far from his children.
I want to bring in CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Zhang. Weijia, what more do we know about why the president chose to grant clemency to all these individuals, especially Blagojevich?
Well, we know President Trump gets a lot of personal recommendations from those who are close to him, whether those are friends, advisors in the administration, and others who want to push for somebody to receive this sort of clemency. And I think he really explained himself there, even though it doesn't necessarily answer the question. The president said that he wanted to do this for Blagojevich because he felt that the sentence, 14 years in prison, was, quote, ridiculous and unfair, and he really wants to go after excessive sentences. He also mentioned that he watched the former governor's wife on Fox News, and that he was moved by the fact that their children were getting older, and that's why he wanted him to be able to go back home and spend time with them. So we know that criminal justice reform is a priority for President Trump because it's something that he's running on and it's something that he can say he accomplished, but it still raises a lot of questions, Rena, because when you look at the list, you know, these are people with connections. You mentioned one, the former owner of the San Francisco 49ers. There were NFL legends here at the White House yesterday that were trotted out to put this entire thing on display. And so when you look at the people, these are not, you know, just regular civilians. These are people who have a lot of money or have friends in high places. And so that's why he continues to receive criticism for his decisions. And by the way, despite saying he is against excessive sentences, the president has also said that he supports the death penalty for drug dealers. And so it's hard to square those two things. But, you know, that's for the president to answer, and we'll continue to ask him about that.
It's fascinating to hear the president say, though, that it was his wife and the children that really weighed heavily on that decision as well. I do want to ask you, though, the president's refused so far to say whether he'll grant a pardon to his convicted former campaign advisor, Roger Stone. He's going to be sentenced tomorrow. We know Attorney General William Barr is being criticized for intervening in that case. Can we expect Stone to get one from the president? Do we know?
Well, you know, all these pardons that we saw yesterday certainly fuel the speculation that he could receive one in the future. And it's not just Roger Stone. The president has a lot of friends turned felons, and that includes his first national security advisor, Michael Flynn. That includes his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. And these are people who the president has publicly defended, sometimes while their investigations are ongoing. In fact, I asked the Deputy Principal Press Secretary Hogan Gidley about that today, because President Trump defends his tweeting by saying everybody has a right to an opinion, and he says his social media is very powerful because it gives him a voice. So even though The Attorney General says it makes his job impossible. President Trump clearly will continue to tweet. So Hogan Gidley says just that the president has every right to do so. But you know, I made the distinction that I don't think Bill Barr has any problem with the president defending himself. The question is whether it's appropriate for the president to be defending his friends while their investigations by the Department of Justice are ongoing. And Gidley just pointed to the fact that President Obama defended Hillary Clinton when there were questions about her email scandal. Of course, the big difference there is, you know, there wasn't a criminal investigation ongoing. So, you know, the White House still has to answer to why President Trump continues to chime in on these investigations, even though Barr has said, please don't.
You know, CBS News has reporting that Barr has considered resigning over the president's tweeting on the Justice Department cases. We know that the DOJ denies this, but we know Barr asked the president to stop tweeting in that ABC interview, as you mentioned. Does Barr actually disagree with the president, or is this just a way for him to put a little space between the Justice Department and the White House? Why speak out now?
You know, that's a great question, because this is not new. I mean, since before he took the job, he knew about President Trump's tendencies to tweet and to talk about these ongoing investigations. What matters here is the criticism that Barr himself received when he intervened in the Roger Stone case by pushing for a lighter sentence than prosecutors recommended. And that really created a lot of tension among Barr and the rank and file of the Justice Department. So I think that, you know, he is trying to make reparations here because, you know, as that tension grows, it becomes increasingly more difficult for Barr to do his job. So it's a great question that Barr has to answer about why now, since this is not exactly something new. And by the way, Barr apparently, according to our sources, privately expressed his frustrations recently to President Trump as well about the tweets. But, you know, whether he's willing to walk away because of it, you know, I would remain skeptical about that because, you know, you look at his record, you look at the decisions that he's made, and it doesn't seem like, you know, he would be so thin-skinned to leave the department because of presidential tweets.
You know, our David Martin has obtained a resignation letter from top Defense Department official John Rood, who says that another apparent casualty of the president's post-impeachment purge, you know, who was Rood exactly? I guess I want to step back and ask. And how did he fit into this entire Ukraine story?
So Rood was the top policy advisor at the Pentagon, so he would have been very involved when it came to distributing that military aid to Ukraine as part of U.S. policy to continue to fight Russian aggression. And we know that he signed off on letters that said that Ukraine was doing its part to root out corruption, and there was not a reason to withhold that aid, which Rood expressed was very important to give to Ukraine. However, we don't know exactly why he left the department. He wrote a letter to the president and made very clear that it was President Trump who asked him to leave, and that's why he was submitting his resignation at the president's request. Earlier today, Hogan Gidley said that the decision was made by the Department of Defense, and so there's some discrepancy there and no clarification so far about exactly whose idea this was first and why he was removed and whether it had anything to do with Ukraine.
I also want to ask you, Weijia, before you go, about the president's schedule. We know he's going to hold a rally tonight in Phoenix. He actually won Arizona by 100,000 votes in 2016. But in the 2018 midterms, Arizona elected its first Democratic senator. They've since flipped 1988. They flipped a House seat as well. Does the president feel that he needs to invest more resources in Arizona? What's his sense in this state? What does he hope to accomplish?
He wants to keep that win that he had in 2016, and he is well aware that it is a vulnerable state for him because, as you mentioned, it did flip. And so they are pouring resources into Arizona as well as the other states where he barely won. And that's why, you know, campaign sources say the map to his victory is actually very small because they're just focusing a lot on those states where he barely won and where he barely lost, frankly, because they think that they can flip some of those states that went blue in 2016 back to President Trump in 2020. But certainly Arizona is incredibly important to the president, and he knows that. But I will point out that he's not just going there. You know, this is part of a major, massive swing at the same time that, as we just saw from Linda and Caitlin, that the Democrats are there. So he wants to make sure people know that he's out there. He wants to take attention away from the Democrats and sort of, you know, troll them in a way by going out there, following them as they are trying to choose their nominee.
Yeah, these stops out west, clearly not an accident. Timing is everything. I want to thank you very much, Weijia Jiang, for joining us from the White House.
Sure. Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break. We've got a lot more news ahead. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on. More than 2,000 people have died due to the corona outbreak. So far, most of them in China, and more than 75,000 are infected worldwide. And still, health officials are optimistic that the daily rate of new infections in China seems to be declining. Michael George has the latest.
Passengers who tested negative for the coronavirus began leaving the Diamond Princess cruise ship at the end of a much criticized 14-day quarantine period. The departure comes the same day Japanese officials announced more infections on board the ship, bringing the total to more than 600.
There was no single professional infection control person inside the ship. The bureaucrats were in charge of everything.
A Japanese infection control specialist who says he boarded the ship went on social media to criticize officials for failing to follow basic protocols. There are currently more than 100 American passengers still in Japan, either on the ship or in the hospital. Even after their quarantine or hospitalization ends, they will still not be allowed back in the U.S. for another 2 weeks. That includes Jerry Jorgensen from Utah, who's hospitalized in Japan.
I could be totally overwhelmed and gnash my teeth and scream and cuss and cry, but wow, if that's really what it's going to be, then that's what it's going to be.
An outbreak of the coronavirus in a South Korean city has prompted the commander of U.S. forces in Korea to order troops who attended a church service to undergo self-quarantine. The risk level for troops in the area has been raised to moderate. And officials say an elderly American woman who tested positive for the virus after getting off the Westerdam cruise ship in Cambodia is in stable condition. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
4 people are dead after 2 planes collided mid-air in Australia today. The crash happened north of Melbourne. All 4 people were confirmed dead at the scene. Officials are not sure why both planes were traveling along the same trajectory. An investigation into the collision is ongoing.
Well, for this week's London Calling, our friends across the pond tell us more about the man considered Britain's biggest political power player. And no, it's not the Prime Minister. Here's Simon Bates.
The commentators are calling him the most powerful person in British politics, and it isn't our Prime Minister Boris Johnson. It's this man, Dominic Cummings. Now, Mr. Cummings is 48 years old, and 4 years ago he directed the campaign which won the referendum to get us out of the European Union. Now, he works in Downing Street as a special advisor to Prime Minister Johnson, and he's causing havoc.
He's still in control, Prime Minister!
You see, Boris Johnson isn't what you'd call a details man, so he tends to delegate most things, and usually to Mr. Cummings. Cummings is a volatile character. Think Steve Bannon, crossed with John Bolton, and you'll get the idea. A few weeks ago, he called for, quote, weirdos and misfits to join up as government advisors to provide original thinking. And boy, did he get one.
But the problem's not just recruitment.
Andrew Cbsn, who had previously advocated compulsory contraception to stop a permanent underclass, and also said that African Americans had lower average IQs than their white counterparts. After a public outcry, Cbsn has now resigned. Last week, Britain's Treasury Secretary also walked because he was asked to fire all his personal aides in a power grab orchestrated by Mr. Cummings. Another of his victims was this government aide, Sonia Khan. Cummings thought she was leaking secrets, so he had her marched out of Downing Street by an armed policeman. She's now claiming for unfair dismissal and discrimination. Let's be honest, Dominic Cummings is a bit of a bully. He enjoys embarrassing aides by asking them questions he knows they can't answer. Former Prime Minister David Cameron once called him a career psychopath, and we all suspect that he's only in a position of considerable power because his boss has taken his eye off the ball. In the end, Mr. Cummings' time will be limited by the number of enemies he makes, and that list is growing. That's London Calling for today. This is Simon Bates for CBS News in London.
Well, still to come, Mike Bloomberg is set to make his debut tonight on the debate stage for the first time since launching his campaign. What challenges lie ahead for the former New York City mayor? Plus, President Trump's four-day Western swing is underway. Is his presence a distraction for Democrats ahead of the Nevada caucus? We're joined by the Trump 2020 communications director after the break. This is CBSN. We'll be right back. Well, President Trump is on day 2 of his 4-state West Coast swing. He's got campaign rallies planned in Phoenix tonight, Colorado on Thursday, and Las Vegas on Friday. The events will serve as counter-programming to the Democrats who will debate in Nevada tonight ahead of Saturday's caucus. Well, today, the president's re-election campaign took out a full-page ad in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. It says that Democrats will kill Nevada jobs and accuses them of big government socialism. It also highlights President Trump's record on the economy. Joining me now from Las Vegas, Mark Lauder. He's the Director of Strategic Communications for the Trump 2020 campaign. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Where do you feel that the president...
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Where do you feel the president has the biggest advantage over Democrats when it comes to moderate and undecided voters on the West Coast?
Well, I think it's in the economy. As things are, we often see that voters vote with their pocketbooks, and so we have this strong economy. We see such growth in low unemployment, rising wages, and even when you look beyond in the lower level data, you see folks, Black Americans, Latino and Hispanic Americans, who are thriving, succeeding, and I think that's one of the reasons why we see the president's approval ratings now at the highest point of his presidency.
I want to ask you about reporting from Politico. It says that the Trump campaign is bringing on an alumni of the controversial data firm Cambridge Analytica to oversee its data operations. I want to ask you, is this true? And what role do you see this person playing?
Well, I'm not aware of what's going on with the data operation, and I don't have anything to comment on that report.
If this were true, do you worry about the optics that this would bring having a former Cambridge Analytica analyst on the Trump team?
I'm not going to get into speculation about who might be joining the team. I can tell you right now, as of today, we have one of the strongest data operations of any presidential campaign in history. We show that. We're going to be showing it again here this week when we're traveling tonight to Phoenix, when we're in Colorado, when we're in Nevada. And it's a real advantage for Republicans right now with what we have in the data team.
What do you think is the biggest advantage on the data team right now that's making the biggest difference for the Trump campaign?
Well, it's the focus that the Republican Party has been putting into it for so many years. We saw that on display during 2016. But what I would also tell you is that when the president goes and does a rally, you can see our campaign manager, Brad Parscale, tweet about it, usually within a day or so after those rallies, the sheer amount of data that we're able to capture from folks who are coming out showing their support for this president. If you're willing to go stand in line for days sometimes in inclement weather, to stand in line to wait to see the president speak, there's a pretty good chance that if we ask you to go to the polls and vote for him in November, you're likely to do it.
I want to ask you about tonight. Michael Bloomberg will make his debut on the debate stage. President Trump's been criticizing the former New York City mayor, accusing him of trying to buy the nomination. What's the president most worried about when it comes to Bloomberg potentially getting a nomination?
Well, we're not worried about any of the specific candidates. Whichever one of them comes out of this mess of a primary, they'll have to get in the ring with the president. But Michael Bloomberg does have some serious issues he has to overcome. His recently exposed racist comments, sexist comments, disparaging comments about farmers and manufacturers, just to name a few. And it doesn't really matter how many billions of dollars Mike Bloomberg plans to set on fire. It's not going to overcome this history of stop and frisk and his support for some very damaging policies.
You mentioned money. Mr. Bloomberg has said regardless of who gets the Democratic nomination, he's going to spend a ton of money on this campaign to unseat the president. What do you make about the amount of money that's being spent on both sides this election cycle?
Well, I think we proved in 2016 that money isn't everything. Hillary Clinton outspent the Trump campaign, and yet we were still successful. I think the key is having the message, and that's where President Trump's leadership is really putting us in a strong position because of the results on the economy, because of the actions he's taken to defend our country against terrorists. Those are very strong arguments why we need to have 4 more years of Donald Trump, and it really doesn't matter how much money the Democrats have. I mean, their platform right now is trillions of dollars in tax increases, taking people's private health care insurance away from them, taking union members' health insurance away from them, and that's not necessarily going to be a winning message for anyone.
Mark, I want to ask you, on Monday, former President Barack Obama tweeted, marking the 11th anniversary of the Recovery Act. Then President Trump accused him of trying to take credit for the economic boom. How is President Obama's legacy playing into your campaign strategy when it comes to the economy?
Well, I think the legacy is what the American people see. We've seen the recent polls out there showing that an overwhelming majority of Americans feel they are better off now than they were 3 years ago. We've seen the historic low unemployment, the increase in wages that we did not see in the previous 16 years under President Obama and President Bush. Those are very strong things. I think the American people are feeling it in their pocketbooks. They definitely like it when they look at their 401ks and their child's savings, college savings accounts that are tied to the stock market. I think there's a very strong case for us to make about why we want to keep that leadership in the White House with President Trump.
Mark Lauder, grateful you can join us, Mark, from Nevada. Thank you very much.
Thank you.